Hi, I'm Michelle.
And I'm Alex, and in this video, we will be discussing whole grains. Have you ever wondered, what is a whole grain? How do I identify a whole grain on a food label? And why are whole grains important to incorporate in my diet? After viewing this presentation, you'll be able to list some common whole grain foods, recognize a whole grain on a food label, and understand how whole grains play a role in heart health and digestion.
First, let's look at what a whole grain is. A whole grain is an unprocessed grain that contains the bran, endosperm, and germ. The bran and the germ contain the majority of the important antioxidants, vitamins, minerals, protein, and healthy fats that are found in whole grains. The endosperm does not contain many nutrients and is the only part of the grain that is left over after it's been refined. Refined grains should be consumed in moderation. Whole grains are much more nutrient-rich compared to refined grains because they contain more protein, healthy fats, and fiber. They also contain many vitamins and minerals that support healthy immune system functions. The 2020 dietary guidelines recommend 3 to 5 servings of whole grains per day. So what does the serving size of one whole grain food look like? One serving is equivalent to 1 ounce of whole grains. 1 ounce is approximately 1 slice of whole wheat bread, half a cup of whole grain pasta, or 1/3 a cup of brown rice. Now we know what a whole grain is and what a serving of whole grains look like. But you may still be wondering, what are some types of whole grains? Some common ones are quinoa, oatmeal, buckwheat, rye, millet, and farro. Corn, including popcorn, is a whole grain too. When shopping for whole grain corn products, be sure to choose the one labeled whole corn and avoid the word degerminated, which means the corn has been refined.
For comparison, here are some examples of non-whole grain foods: white rice, white bread, white pastas, and pastries commonly made with white flour, like donuts, biscuits, and cakes. These types of foods are all refined grains that are not nutrient-rich like a whole grain is. Because of this, these kinds of foods should be consumed in moderation. Now we know what types of foods are whole grains, but you might be left wondering, how do I recognize whole grain foods by looking at a food label? Here's one easy way to identify a whole grain food. Look for these stamps. There are 3 different stamps to look out for. This one means that the grain in the food contains 100% of the whole grain. This one means that the grain in the food contains at least 50% or more of the whole grain. And this one means that the food contains a good amount of whole grain, but it is mostly refined grain. However, not all labels will include these stamps. That doesn't mean that they are not whole grain foods. Let's look at some common words found on the ingredient lists of food labels and see which ones are definitely whole grains and which ones are not. When shopping for a whole grain food, look for the words whole wheat, oats or oatmeal, brown rice, whole grain, or whole followed by a type of grain, or wheat berries. These words mean that the food contains all part of the grain. The words wheat, semolina, durum wheat, organic flour, and stone ground are a little trickier. They may or may not contain the whole grain. When you're unsure, avoid foods that contain these words on the ingredient list when you're shopping for whole grain foods. Multigrain could be a mix of all whole grains, a mix of refined grains and whole grains, or a mix of all refined grains. The words enriched flour, wheat flour, bran, wheat germ, and degerminated are never found on whole grain food labels. These should be avoided when shopping for a whole grain food.
Now let's discuss the role of whole grains in digestion. Whole grain foods are rich in fiber and complex carbohydrates. These foods take longer to digest, thus keeping your blood sugar levels normal, keeping your risk for diabetes down. Another health benefit of whole grains is the reduced risk of colon cancer. This is due to a high fiber content in whole grains, which contains soluble and insoluble fiber. The insoluble fiber acts as a scrub in your intestines. The high fiber content in whole grain foods also promote healthy bowel movements. Whole grain foods also have a positive impact on heart health. The high fiber content in whole grains helps to reduce the bad cholesterol, which can lower your risk for heart disease. According to the Heart Foundation, Including whole grains in your diet is associated with a 16 to 30% decreased risk for heart disease. Because the fiber in whole grains helps to reduce bad cholesterol in your body, this also means that there is a decreased risk of stroke associated with whole grain consumption. Whole grain consumption may also reduce blood pressure.
Hopefully now you are able to understand what a whole grain is, identify a whole grain on a food label, and explain the role of whole grains in heart health and digestion. Thanks for watching.